I'll begin with a bit of self-deprecating self-revelation. When I was perhaps middle school age, on nights when sleep did not come easily, I would lie awake in my bed and imagine tragically noble ways that I might die and how the world would mourn my passing. I painted scenes of a heroic life, epic and inspiring. In some scenes, I was a martyr for my faith. Standing before some merciless Cold War firing squad, my back to a stone wall, and a menacing voice would offer me a choice. We'll give you one last chance. Curse God, renounce your faith, and we will let you live, or you can hold fast to your foolish faith and die. And I'd look into the steely gray eyes behind the steely gray gun barrels, and I'd say, well, go ahead and shoot me then. No. That's too much B-movie bravado. How about, I could lie and save my life, but then I'd have to live with myself. No. Way too corny, way too wordy. How about, I'd rather serve my God and die than curse my God and live. Usually took 2 or 3 tries to get the dialogue just right. And then the gun barrels would belch their terrible fire and I would fall lifeless to the ground, but someone watching would be touched by my noble bravery. Someone would want to know a God I'd be willing even to die for, and so the cause of the gospel would continue. Nay, it would be furthered by my sacrifice. Even better than the martyr scenes were the hero scenes, though. A child playing on a frozen pond falls through the ice, and I, with not a single thought for my own welfare, rush to help her. There's no time for rescuers. She can't swim, so I go in after her. And then comes the daydreamer's decision. Is it more heroic to pull her from the water all by myself and then pass away from a chronic wasting cough? Or to struggle to hold her above the water until the rescuers arrive and then, spent from the effort, slip beneath the surface without a ripple as everyone lauds my heroic sacrifice with tear-stained admiration, which is the more admirable way to lay down a life. If the story was good enough or the ending noble enough, I could bring a tear to my own eye before nodding off to sleep. I can, of course, poke fun at myself now, but I think there was a pretty simple desire beneath such adolescent imaginings. I wanted my life to be written a little bit larger than it felt to me at the time. I wanted to matter more than I felt like I mattered. Instead of being a small, anonymous star twinkling away in some unimportant corner of a vast and indifferent sky, I wanted to be a shooting star, spectacular in my moment in time and the whole universe marked by the noble arc of my passing. And in order to do that, in order to matter deeply, even then I had the sense that my life needed to be given in service of something larger. My life for the cause of the gospel in the first daydream I described, or my life given to save another life in the second. I guess, in my own way, I was arriving at a sense of this truth. In the end, life, our time, is like money. In order for it to have any worth, you have to invest it in some way or spend it in some way, and how you spend it matters. Does my life make the world better? Does it touch other lives? Does it leave a ripple? And that, I believe, is what our scripture lessons invite us to consider. In the Gospel of John, Jesus states, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to bear fruit that will last. We find the same message in the letter known as 1 John. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. Little children, let us love not in word or speech, but in truth and action. To lay down one's life. That means, I think, to realize that we cannot hold life or hoard it or grasp it or control it. I can't choose not to spend a day or a month or a year. I can only choose how to spend a day or a month or a year. I have to lay down my life for something. And we ought to lay down our lives for each other. In my middle school daydreams, laying down my life for others involved plunging into frozen ponds or diving in front of speeding subway trains to push someone to safety, or giving my last breath that another might continue breathing. And that is perhaps the most dramatic way to lay down a life. But I think a better understanding of laying down our lives for one another is doing what love requires, no matter the cost. It means loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. It means perhaps making the simple daily decision to spend my life selflessly and not selfishly. This is, I think, the generosity of self that the gospel invites us to display. Viewed in that light, there are countless people who have laid down their lives for me, set aside their priorities, and made me their priority. I can begin, of course, with my parents and the sacrifices they made so that I could grow, succeed, become. I often took it for granted that I got new clothes when they had the same clothes, that I went to college while they tightened their belts, that I never had a need that somehow wasn't their need. They consistently laid aside their wants, aspirations, and possibilities in service of mine. But I guess that isn't surprising, because good parents are supposed to do that. And I've never doubted that I had good parents. More surprising are others of no relation to me who have laid down the living of their lives for me. My scoutmaster, when I was 11 years old, was Gilmer Whicker. Mr. Whicker ran a small oil and heating business in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where I grew up. And my memory is that his hands were always a little bit black from his work. Not dirty, but darkened. Mr. Whicker spent every Wednesday night for the years I knew him coming to scout meetings, and once a month he went out and slept on the ground in a tent instead of at home in a warm bed with his wife. Each summer he took a week of his vacation time and went with us to scout camp. And only now do I begin to contemplate. Gilmer Whicker didn't have a son in that scout troop. He was nearly old enough to retire, and he frankly wasn't in the best of health. He carried salt substitute to put on his eggs, and his breathing had a little wheezing hitch to it. I'm well aware now that sleeping on the ground put a lot more ache in his bones than it did in mine. I earned my Eagle Scout Award because of Gilmer Whicker, and what that did for me in terms of scholarships or job offers or just self-confidence, I simply can't count. When he could have been doing most anything else, Gilmer Whicker laid down his life, his priorities, and in so doing, he touched my life. Out of 1,000 things he could have spent his time on, he chose to spend it without compensation on me. And he devoted his time and attention for years to other people's children. There's no greater love than that. Love like that, love that gives unstintingly of self, is the consistent invitation of the gospel. When Jesus calls his disciples, he comes up to them on a beach one day in the midst of their ordinary lives, and he offers to them an invitation. Lay down your life. Set aside work for work's sake, and give yourself to others for God's sake. And by the way, give yourself to those who need you the most. If you think it's satisfying to put food in just your own belly or your family's bellies, try feeding someone who's hungry. If you think it's gratifying to love those who have a support system, try loving those without one. Love a refugee. Love the homeless. Love a transgendered person who has been rejected by family. Love a lonely person. You will be giving life. You will feel the touch of God through your own fingers. Follow me, Jesus says, and discover that in giving your life away, you don't die, you live more. This sheds light on a curious expression of Jesus that's recorded in some form in each of the Gospels. Those who try to make their life secure will lose it. But those who lose or perhaps simply give away their life for my sake will keep it. To live life to its fullest is to give life away. Now that brings us to an interesting observation. We live in a culture that often invites us to focus on the individual. My rights, my welfare, my priorities, my success. I, me, mine, in the words of the old Beatles song. We are invited daily to consume and to fend off threats to our consumption. We lament global warming and climate change, but we don't want to alter our lifestyle or consumption to do anything about it. We lament hunger and poverty elsewhere, but simultaneously guard ourselves against those who try to come to this country because their families are hungry and poor. Our culture invites us to hoard life, to build bigger barns, to want what we don't need, and to consume what we don't own. And if Jesus is right, in that very grasping after the good life, the full life, the ideal life, we are losing life. Instead, he calls and invites, give your life away and don't count the cost. Lay down your life for another. Whoever has 2 coats must share with anyone who has none. The book of Acts describes the early Christian community. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need, And day by day, they spent much time together in the temple. They broke bread in one another's houses and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. They radically shared their lives. And day by day, the Lord added to their number. Sharing is realizing that what I have, my resources, my talents, even my life, is somehow not my own. Sharing is not giving away time on my hands or resources I don't really need, but it is dividing my life with another, giving my life to the world, laying down my life, my interests, my priorities, my pursuits for my friends. And it's seeking out strangers and treating them as friends. And it's discovering life by losing life and giving it away. That, I believe, is what we come here to learn and to practice. How to set aside individualism in search of community. How to seek and to see God in others. How to broaden our definition of community until strangers are made friends. That's generosity of self. It is the assertion of radical interdependence over radical independence. And this is a sermon for another day, but it's a thought worth mentioning now. Sometimes the most generous thing we can do is to receive the gifts of another. We can get so caught up in our delight in giving that we fail to delight in the gifts of others. So, day by day, together, we spend our lives, feeding the hungry, comforting the grieving, helping the homeless, visiting the lonely or the prisoner. We give generously, unstintingly of self, and we learn more and more to lay aside our lives in service of others. And we discover that our lives then matter not only to us or to those closest to us, but they matter deeply to the world. Our small lives become significant beyond measure to someone. And somehow, giving we receive, and feeding we are fed, and praying for others we are prayed for, and loving we are loved. It isn't as melodramatic as a preteen daydream, but it is a laying down of life nonetheless. Laying down a small life in order to find a larger one. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. Thanks be to God. Amen.